Hi guys, Mr. Philosophus. We're coming to you with chapter 3 of Hatchet. I hope that you've been enjoying the book so far. And it's about to get interesting because Brian's plane just ran out of gas. Chapter 3. Going to die, Brian thought. Going to die. Going to die, going to die. I am gonna die. His whole brain screamed it in the sudden silence. I'm gonna die when this plane goes down. He wiped his mouth with the back of his arm and he held the nose down. The plane went into a glide, a very fast glide, that ate altitude, and suddenly there weren't any lakes. All he'd seen since they started flying over the forest was lakes, and now they were gone. Gone. Out in front, far away from the horizon. He could see lots of them. Off to the right and the left, more of them, glittering blue in the late afternoon sun. But he needed one right now. He needed one right in front of him. He desperately needed a lake right in front of the plane, and all he saw through the windshield were trees. Green death trees. If he had to turn, he couldn't think that he could keep the plane flying. His stomach tightened into a series of rolling knots, and his breath came in short bursts. There! Not quite in front, but slightly to the right, he saw a lake. It was in the shape of an L, with rounded corners, and the plane was nearly aimed at the long part of the L, coming from the bottom and heading to the top. Just a tiny bit to the right. He pushed the right rudder pedal gently, and the nose moved over. But the turn cost him speed, and now the lake was above the nose. He pulled back on the wheel, and suddenly the nose of the plane came up. This caused the plane to slow down dramatically, and it almost seemed to stop and just hang in the air. The controls became very loose feeling, and this frightened Brian, making him push the wheel back in. This increased the speed a bit, but filled the windshield once more with nothing but trees, and put the lake well above the nose and out of reach. For a space of 3 or 4 seconds, things seemed to hang, almost stop. The plane was flying, but so slowly, it would never reach the lake. Brian looked out to the side and saw a small pond, and at the edge of the pond some sort of large animal. He thought it might be a moose, standing out in the water. It was all so still looking, so stopped. The pond, the moose, the trees, as he slid over to them, and now only 300 or 400 feet off the ground. It was all like a picture. Then everything happened at once. Trees suddenly took on detail, filled his whole vision with green, and he knew that he would hit and die. He would die, but the luck held on. Just as he was hit, he came into an open lane, a channel of trees, a wide place leading to the lake. The plane committed now to landing, to crashing. It fell in a wide place like a stone, and Brian eased back on the wheel and braced himself for the crash. But there was a tiny bit of speed left, and when he pulled on the wheel, the nose came up, and he saw in front of him the blue of the lake, and at that instant his plane hit the trees. There was a great wrenching as the wings caught the pines at the side of the clearing and broke back, ripping back just outside of the main braces. Dust and dirt blew off the floor, and his face so hard he thought that there must have been some kind of an explosion. He was momentarily blinded, and then he slammed forward in the seat, smashing his head on the steering wheel. Then a wild crashing sound, the ripping of metal, and the plane rolled to the right and blew through the trees, out over the water and down to slam into the lake. Skip once on the water as it was as hard as concrete. Water that tore the windshield out and shattered all the side windows. Water that drove him back into his seat. Somebody was screaming as the plane drove down into the water. Someone screamed, very loud and tight animal screams of fear and pain, and he did not know that the sound was coming from him. That he roared against the water that took him, and the plane still deeper down in the water. He saw nothing, but he sensed blue, cold blue-green. He rigged at the seatbelt catch. He tried to unbuckle it the best he could. He tore his fingernails loose on one hand. He ripped at it until somehow it released. And somehow the water was trying to kill him, to end him. He pulled himself out of the shattered front window and he clawed up into the blue. He felt something holding him back. He felt his windbreaker jacket tear, and he was free, tearing free, ripping free. But so far to the surface, and his lungs could not do this thing. He could not hold. And he could not hold. And he sucked water. He took a great inhale, a great pull that would finally win, finally take him. And then his head broke into the light. He vomited and he swam, pulling without knowing what he was, without knowing what he was doing, without knowing anything, pulling until his hands caught at the weeds and the muck and the mud, pulling and screaming until his hands caught at least on grass and brush, and he felt his chest on land. He felt his face on the coarse blades of grass, and he stopped. Everything stopped. A color came that he had never seen before, a color that exploded in his mind with pain, and he was gone, gone from it all, spiraling out into the world, spiraling out into nothing, nothing. So that's the end of chapter 3. It was a short chapter, but a lot happened. Brian's plane crashed into some trees. He was able to steer it, so when it finally went down, instead of landing on the hard ground, it landed into a lake. And Brian was able to get himself out of the plane and swim to shore. He smashed his head up pretty good, and he's definitely injured. So we'll see. Even though he survived the plane crash, let's see what happens next.